Really glad to be here, really excited to be here. My name is Vin Adala. I'm a product manager here at Salesforce, and one of the areas that I own is actions. And it's really great to see a big full house here because this is also my first Dreamforce and my first presentation at the Dreamforce as well. So consider you guys selves lucky. And me lucky. And I'm doing this session a couple more times so I can see how popular it already is. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is alternatives to JavaScript buttons. We've run metrics, we've done customer surveys. I personally talk to a lot of customers, and JavaScript buttons are heavily used. But when we go to Lightning, they're not supported for good reasons. And I'm going to talk about what those reasons are, why, and also give you some alternatives, both declaratively and programmatically. And I know from the people that have signed up, we've got a wide array of skill set here, ranging from sort of the admin, low-code, no-code level, all the way to developer. So I'm going to try to cater to everybody. So if there are some things that you're like, hey, that doesn't apply to me, there's probably applies to somebody else in the audience. So let's jump right in. It was working. That's fine. Let's try it again. Interesting. It does not want to advance. So let me try it without this. Nope, does not want to advance. So this is going to be interesting. That's fine. So forward-looking statement. I'm going to be talking about a number of things today, and we just want to make sure that you make all your purchasing decisions based on what's available to you today, because I'm going to be talking about some cool things that are coming up in the future. It looks like I'm just going to have to be switching back and forth. Let me try one other thing. Okay, much better. All right, so just to get everybody sort of on the same page, actions, they're heavily used. And one of the most common things people use it for is to modernize their business processes. It allows you to put relevant information and relevant processes at the time that it's needed. So if somebody's working on an opportunity, they want to send an email, or if they want to do some sort of pre-validation, or you have your own custom process that you want to attach on top of what Salesforce builds, actions are often used. And they're also used very heavily in Salesforce 1 as well. So when we're considering migrating away from JavaScript buttons, we need to consider all of that. JavaScript buttons, as I said, when we talk to customers, when we run metrics, we know that they're heavily used, and they're one of the most common customizations and most powerful customizations we see. Why? Because you're mixing the world of JavaScript with the world of Salesforce, two very powerful worlds, bringing them together to do some things that haven't been there before. So there are some legitimate reasons people do this. One is potentially feature gaps. We don't have a certain feature set available to you, so as a result, you resort to JavaScript buttons. Or there's just some really powerful, cool processes that you need to build, and as a result, you do those. The issue with this is that, of course, there are probably very smart JavaScript developers here. People know JavaScript much better than I do, but there's a lot of people that don't know JavaScript. And what we've seen happen is that often there's untrusted JavaScript code that is used throughout orgs. This JavaScript code could have been just poorly written, or maybe it was just picked up from the internet doing some sort of a Google search, and all of a sudden you've got this untrusted JavaScript code mingling with Salesforce. So what is the downside? What is the bad side effect to that? Well, that's a huge security issue, because we've seen some of this JavaScript code. What it does is it goes into what we call cross-component access. It starts accessing information that is available on other parts of the page. You may have two components, and maybe due to HIPAA compliance, you've got a component that should not be accessed, and that information should not be given out without a specific set of APIs. Well, with JavaScript, you can basically parse the HTML DOM. You can go wherever you want in the DOM and pick up the information. And sometimes we've even seen JavaScript code manipulating the DOM that we are presenting to the users. So the issue with this is that over time, this JavaScript code we are unable to support it over time as we go, as we add features, because manipulating DOM, doing these sorts of things with JavaScript is not something that we support. So we see customer solutions break. We see that sometimes JavaScript buttons are not used, but that code is just sort of sitting around in this org. So you can see the picture that I'm trying to paint is that we have this this untrusted JavaScript code basically lying around and creating a trust issue and a upgradability and a manageability issue. So with Lightning, what we've done is we've taken this problem and sort of tackled it head on. And one of the things we've implemented, which you probably all heard about, is Locker Service. And Locker Service, what it does is make sure that everything that is running in Lightning is secure and bound by the rules of Locker Service. So when you create Lightning components, for example, they will not be able to just parse the DOM, look at the HTML elements, and find out what another Lightning component is displaying, or modify the information about another Lightning component. So you might be saying, hey, that was pretty powerful, but there are ways of doing that. We have APIs that allow you to do that. The other thing we've also saw is people that want to use basically our ecosystem and partners and developers and the things that they build to utilize, to bring functionality as well. So oftentimes with Lightning, you can get the solution off of AppExchange or through other Lightning components. And what we've also looked at is looking at some of these gaps and saying, hey, are there declarative alternatives to doing this? Yes, we know that programmatic alternatives are great, but there are situations where things can be just solved really simply without programming. So I'm going to be covering some of those as well. So make sure everybody's on the same page about the different types of actions that we have. So we have these things called object-specific actions. And these run right here on that object, and you can see when I hit the drop-down, you get a list of actions. These are customizable. And the unique thing about these set of actions is that they're aware of the record context. They're aware of the record ID, so you can do things like update records and create child records. So this is a question I get pretty often because it's very different from these global actions, which are not aware of record ID and record context. So they can't be used for things like updating a record. They can be used for things like creating new records and new events. So you have this option of when you're migrating away from JavaScript buttons to Lightning alternatives, you have these options. But on top of this, we've got something called custom actions. So these are tailor-made to your needs. So we built some things declaratively, which I will demo for you. But that's not going to solve all the use cases and all the problems out there. So we do have these things called custom actions. Primarily in Lightning, we support Lightning component actions. And if you're familiar with writing Lightning components, you can use that same knowledge, and utilizing that exact same knowledge, you can actually create Lightning component actions. And what these actions do is they are set up in such a way that they will invoke your Lightning components. And this, as a result, is how you can start looking at some of the more advanced JavaScript use cases, maybe advanced workflows that you've built in JavaScript, and port them over using Lightning components. Lightning components only work in the Lightning experience. So if you're in a situation where you have a mixed org, where some people are using Salesforce Classic and some people are using Lightning, or you're in the middle of a transition and you need to provide something temporarily, Visualforce actions, they work on both. And these are important. They are similar. What they do is, and we'll go into a demo of this, is you can create an action, assign it a Visualforce page, and you can then invoke that page using your actions. So that's another alternative. And the third alternative is Canvas actions. We don't see this too often, but they're an interesting use case because they allow you to integrate third-party applications right inside Salesforce. That one we won't demo today. So let's jump right in. So one of the first ones, so what we did is we looked at all the JavaScript button use cases out there. We surveyed, we ran some metrics, we're scouring our forums and chatter groups. And the good news is that a majority of them fall into certain categories, and I'll explain each category. And I'd love to sort of have you guys do a mental breakdown of where your JavaScript buttons fall under and in which category. So one of the first things that we see people use JavaScript buttons is for something that we call URL hacks. So URL hacks was never really a feature that was supported, but it worked. And what it did is that utilizing URLs, you could send in a field ID and a value for that field. And when you invoke that URL, that form that came up had everything automatically pre-filled and pre-populated. Again, this was never a feature, but it worked, and people utilized it because we had a feature gap. The good news is that we've actually built this feature right into the Actions framework now. And you don't have to do this utilizing URL hacks, and you don't have to have JavaScript buttons to do that. And I'll give you a demo of how that works. The next one that we see very, very often is that, in fact, this makes up a majority of the JavaScript buttons, is a single-line JavaScript code where people are calling things like window.top or location. So what they're doing is they're taking, they're utilizing a button to change the URL that you're looking at. So when you say window.top and it goes to google.com or another Salesforce page, such as an account ID, when you invoke that, it'll take you to an external website, or within Salesforce, pop up an edit dialog. So again, there's no need for utilizing JavaScript for that or window.top because we've actually built that directly into our Lightning and Actions framework. So what we have is called custom URL buttons. And what they allow you to do is they allow you to navigate to URLs outside of Salesforce or within or directly within Salesforce. So if we look at a few examples, the first one there is google.com. It'll take you to a Google page in a new tab. The second one, if you provide a relative Salesforce URL, it supports the variable, supports variables there, so account.id. So we're saying, hey, open up the record home of that account ID. And if you look at the third one there, you can even open up an edit page by giving the account ID and giving it the URL/e. So that opens it up in an account page. And we also have support for URL4 and a number of other things. So again, this tends to be one of the most common use cases for JavaScript buttons is opening URLs. So let me give you sort of a quick demo of how these two work. So I'm going to jump into my web browser here. So I've got an org that I'm playing with here. And this is in Lightning. If you're not familiar with Lightning there, that's Lightning. And I've created two buttons here which mimic each of those two use cases, which was the auto-populating fields, and the other one was URLs. So if we look at one of the buttons here, it's called Update Contact. This is running in Lightning, so you know this is not being done with JavaScript. So just show you how it works. So this user here, right now, does not have an email address. And what I've created is I've created an update record action, and I'm going to pre-populate that email address with their first name, last name, underscore last name, and @company.com. So there it is. So that was his first name, underscore last name, @company.com. So how exactly did I do that? So inside the object manager, I went to the contact object setup. I'm in button links and actions. And what I basically did is I created a new action, and I selected update a record, and I went ahead and filled this out, and I'll show you the action that I created. And it's called update contact right here. And once you go ahead and create the action, you get this section called predefined field values. Again, this is where you would get rid of your URL hacks. You wouldn't need this. So in here, I've defined something for the email field, so let's go in and look at it. So it's the email field, and you can see here, that's just the formula that I gave. Pretty simple. So contact.firstname, utilizing insert field, and then I concatenate it with the underscore, concatenate that with contact.lastname, and scroll over to the right, @company.com. So similarly, you can, we support any field type. The only field type we don't support yet, which we are looking to supporting for this predefined value feature, is multi-select pick lists. So that's the only field type that doesn't work, but all the other field types do work. So it was literally as simple as that. You're familiar with the UI, it's declarative, you know the formula engine, basically go ahead and create the formula. Excuse me, I'm also a little bit sick, so if I sound a little stuffy, that's why. So the other thing that I created is this open map. So this is a use case for invoking URLs. So here I've got this mailing address, San Francisco, California, and I just want to open Google Maps to San Francisco, California. Pretty simple. So I'll go ahead and hit the Open Map button, and you'll see what it does. It's saying, hey, you're moving away from Salesforce to open google.com. Are you sure you want to do this? Yep, I'm 100% sure I want to do this. And what did it do? It opened another tab, google.com, and took me to San Francisco, which it read off of here. Again, no JavaScript required. How did I do that? So the button is called Open Map. So go back to Button Links and Actions. And I actually already created the Open Map button. It is a detail page button with a URL. And the way I created that is using new buttons and links. I selected detail page button. I gave it some name and labels. And here in the URL, let me just show you what I created. In my demos, I don't like to type live, which, the demo gods never favor me, which is why I'm doing this. So what I've got here is very simple, and I created a label, a detail page button, and if you're wondering what other types of links there are, you can just hit this view example. It'll give you an idea of what each of them do, but tangential. So it displays a new URL button. In the past, you might have selected on-click JavaScript here and called window.top, this URL. Don't need to do that. You select the URL, google.com, and here is the field that I utilized. This is the field that was giving me San Francisco. And when I invoked it, you saw what happened. I saw Google Maps with San Francisco. Again, solved declaratively. So let's jump into some things that are even more complicated and sort of see what we can do. So make sure I start from the current slide. Okay, excellent. So those were pretty simple, but again, like I mentioned, they tend to be the most common sets of use cases that we see with JavaScript buttons. But there's a set of them that are definitely more complicated, that are not single-line JavaScripts, that are multifunctional, made of many JavaScript functions, and they do quite a number of things. The good news is for most of them that we don't consider a security risk, Lightning components do support them, right? As I did mention, Lightning components will not allow you to parse the HTML DOM willy-nilly and pick out information from wherever you want and insert elements into our DOM without our knowledge. That is not something that we want to support and consider supporting, but we want to offer alternatives. So apart from doing that, you can pretty much do everything else. So again, we look back into the more advanced use cases, and we surveyed and figured out what the most common themes tend to be. So the most common themes around JavaScript buttons tend to be around validating data. And what I mean by this is that they want to do, customers want to do client-side validation. You don't want to have to submit your data all the way to the server to get validation on your data. So this is what we call client-side validation. JavaScript's great for that. It's a client-side technology, and that's what it's often used for. Again, that's a feature gap, right? The other one is that pre-populating values in line. Maybe you're looking at a certain field and the user types something, and based on what they type, you pre-populate a field in the form that's further down. Another huge use case around JavaScript buttons is feedback and confirmation messages. These range from a dialog coming up and saying, pick option 1, option 2, or option 3. So for example, a dialog may come up and say, hey, you have a choice between URL 1, URL 2, URL 3. Which one do you want to invoke? Or they range from confirmation dialog, just yes or no. Hey, are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no. Or just an OK dialog. So all sorts of dialog-based use cases. And keep in mind, the dialogs that come up are JavaScript dialogs and rendered as JavaScript, and they tend to look a little bit out of place. The other aspect where people create custom JavaScript is for third-party integrations. They want to integrate with another third party, another REST API. That's what JavaScript buttons are used for. Good news is we have Lightning, programmatic alternatives to all of these. So this is sort of where I jump into the programmatic aspects of moving away from JavaScript buttons. So before I jump further into that, just want a quick note about Visualforce. As I mentioned, it works in both Classic and Salesforce. And the other thing unique about Visualforce is that it also works on lists and related lists as well, which Lightning Component Actions, which I'm going to cover in the next slide, don't work. Again, that is a feature gap that we are looking into closing in the future. It's very high on the roadmap. So if you need to do any sort of these custom actions on lists and you were using JavaScript buttons, for example, to do something on a list of records or on a related list, you would want to use Visualforce actions for that. And a note about the Lightning Component Actions. Again, as I said, they're built on the Lightning Component Actions framework. And whatever you learn about Lightning Components are applicable to there. And they work automatically and out of the box in Salesforce 1 as well. So just to make sure everybody gets on the same page about Lightning Components, because this topic in itself is quite vast, but I'm going to sort of boil it down to the bits of information that you would need to get started and to understand the demo and the code that I'm going to demonstrate to you guys. And if you open up our developer tool, then you notice that when you create a Lightning component, you're going to see a set of 8 files that you need to work with. But for our purposes, I'm only going to concentrate on 4 of the most important files. And again, I'm not a Lightning component expert. There are others on my team that are, and I'm sure there are other sessions. But again, this is just to give you a primer going forward about what we're going to do. So Lightning components, the first file is the component file. It ends in the extension CMP. And the purpose of this file is it is the HTML markup, and it contains the Aura attributes. And it importantly calls the JavaScript controller to do some work. So this is sort of your structure of your component. If you have, for example, the component firing a dialog, or if your component shows a certain labels and has certain fields on it, right? You would set and create those fields in this component. This is kind of like like an HTML page. And in it has the Aura attributes. The primary one we're going to talk about is record ID. And it then calls a JS controller. So if you have a button on your component, and when you click the button, it's supposed to do something, that doing something is actually defined in the JS controller, which is the second file. It ends in .js, meaning it is a JavaScript file. And this is where you'd go and write your JavaScript code. And the functions in this controller are invoked by c.function. I call these out because you're going to see it in the code, and you're kind of going to wonder what is v and what is c. That's sort of what it refers to. Those are, I would say, are the 2 most important files, really. Then you've got your style sheet, which is your CSS file. And you can use SLDS to style your components. Or you can use CSS. And the great thing about SLDS, if you use it to style the components, is it looks like whatever that you've built looks like it's part of the Lightning experience. It doesn't look sort of awkward if that's important to you. For example, when you invoke a JavaScript dialog in Lightning, it sort of looks, it sort of looks awkward because each browser has its own look and feel for a JavaScript alert. But here you can actually use our APIs to do some pretty cool stuff, which I'll demo. Including invoking toasts. The last one is the Apex controller. And what the Apex controller does is it's a server-side controller that'll handle your requests from the JavaScript controller. So it'll make the actual SQL queries to read and write data. And we're actually evolving this technology as well to LDS, called Lightning Data Service. So in certain situations, you may not even have to worry about Apex controller. And if you're interested in LDS, I know one of my colleagues, Kamyar, he owns that area, and he's been doing some sessions around that. But today, for this demo, we're going to use the Apex controller. So with LDS, this becomes even simpler. So let me give you a quick preview of the code. So when you create a Lightning component action, again, I said a lot of the information that you know about Lightning components is translatable to these. But the things that I want to point out, which you're going to see again in the demo, is when you're going to, on the first line, implement force Lightning quick action. So what this does is it tells us that this component that you're building is meant to be used as an action. And the next, right after that is force has record ID. So this interface gives us access to the record ID that you've invoked the action from. So if you want to do something on that record, we need to make sure we have the record ID. In the third line there, we created our attribute record ID, and this is where we're storing the record ID. And on the last line where you see the red box, that there's a button there, and when you click the button, it calls update compensation. So what this component is doing is a simple example. It's basically saying, hey, do you want to change the compensation to 0? You get basically a user interface that does that. I'll show you that. And this is sort of what the JS controller looks like. It may seem like a lot of code, but it's actually not very much code. You created the JS function there called update compensation on the left side. Second line is var ID. And what this var ID is doing, it's getting the record ID that you've put from the component file that I've showed you previously and giving it access. And you're basically, in number 2 there, you're basically defining the action, update compensation, and that's going to call the Apex controller to make the SOQL query to set your information, to set the value to 0. And once you run this, you get a callback basically saying, hey, once the Apex controller function finishes running, what should I do? And in this case, it just sort of creates an alert dialog that says successful. We're going to see this, and this is the Apex method. And again, it's just a SOQL query that is setting the value to 0. And this is basically when you create the action. The most important one is the second, the second drop down there. It says what is the Lightning component that you want to use, and the action type is a Lightning component. So this is once you've created a Lightning component, this is how it works. And you add it to the page layout, and you get your button there. So what are the things that we can actually do with this? So let's spend a little bit of time looking into that. So I'm going to jump to accounts. So I give a quick overview of that concept because I wanted everybody to be familiar with it to show you what that concept can actually do. So one of the things is we built a component where, let's say you have billing address and shipping address here. And you want to open these conditionally. You want to give the user an option to open one or the other. So here's a Lightning component action you built using the same framework that I just quickly went through. And when you click on it, you get a dialog. And it looks like a dialog that definitely belongs here. And you've got 2 options, open billing address and shipping address. When I hit open billing address, it opens up the billing address in a Google page there. And if I hit open shipping address, you can definitely imagine what happens here. So this is conditional, something that we built with the component. What else can you do? We've created a quick contact form. So what you can do with this is a client-side JavaScript data validation. So here, first name is something that we need. It needs to be typed out. But if I don't type it and just hit tab, you get the validation error, complete this field. Notice we haven't submitted anything. If I go into phone, for example, and just type in text and hit tab, it tells me, hey, the phone number needs to contain digits and hyphens. So again, client-side validation, one of the top use cases. What else can we do? So when we go into opportunities, we have probability here, the probability field. Oh, wrong one. We have the probability field. It's right now at 80%. Wouldn't it be great if we gave an option where the probability can be changed in this way, high, medium, and low? And this is all being styled through SLDS. So for example, if I set probability low, you notice probability goes to 20%. And if I set it to high, it goes to 80%. And on top of that, you got this toast message here. And one more that I want to do here is convert this opportunity to pro bono. And it says, are you sure you want to do this? Again, it doesn't look anything like a traditional JavaScript dialog because I'll show you the code for this. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no? If I say no, it just cancels it out. If I say yes, notice what happens to this amount. So I hit yes, and it turns 0, and you get a success message. So how did we do this? Again, I'm going to jump right into code here. Again, it's It's a set of 3 files, as I mentioned, the component file, and it's nicely commented, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Basically, important things again, you've got this Aura component, has record ID, and then we've also got force lightning quick action, and we have another option is without header. And again, we've created these SLDS modal dialogues. That's the yes or no dialogue that you saw. And gave it some text, and also created a JavaScript button that goes ahead and calls the yes for this and no for that, cancel. So this convert to pro bono is defined here in the JavaScript controller. And you basically go and get the record ID, and you set that for your Apex controller to use, and you get a callback on what happens when it's success or failure. And then you go into the Apex controller, and you basically go ahead and set the amount to 0, very much like the example I showed. Now, what we're doing with this, the reason this looks so heavily commented is because, again, safe harbor, one of the things we're trying to do is that we know the set of demos that I just showed you are very common, and we don't have to have people build the same things over and over again. So if you have there's a bunch of people with use cases around dialogue, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So we are looking at distributing these components on AppExchange Labs in such a way that there'll be potentially unmanaged packages that you can basically download and modify the code yourself. And it's going to be a great starting point because you can already see the number of use cases that this covers. And we're hoping that that sort of not only helps bridge the gap in the interim while we figure out if there are declarative alternatives to this or if there are feature set that needs to go right into the platform, but also a way to jumpstart people who are not familiar with Lightning components, because this is one of our newer technologies. So we're pretty excited about that. Stay tuned on how. Stay tuned on that. I can't promise a date, but we're working very hard to get these components out to you guys. So in summary, what I want to say is we covered a number of use cases around actions that we've learned through surveying and metrics, and there are declarative alternatives to things that you were using JavaScript buttons for, such as URLs and URL hacks and predefined values, and there are Lightning component or programmatic alternatives to some of the other more advanced use cases. There is a trailhead which I will send you guys to, which is called Lightning Alternatives to JavaScript. So that goes more in, it covers this, and it also has a hands-on exercise where you're building a Lightning component and test your code. On this community, success community, we have a Lightning Now group, and I would urge everybody to join. So when we do release these component toolkit in AppExchange Labs, we'll be sure to post it there. And we have myself and a whole bunch of other product managers as well that help you migrate over to Lightning. And if you're having challenges, particularly with JavaScript buttons, or you think there's a use case that I haven't covered here, we can definitely engage there. We're very active, so I'll point you to that one. Also, if you don't want to wait that long, we do have Lightning consultations here, right here in the Lightning Lookout, and I'll be there, I believe, on Thursday. And lastly, if this was interesting to you, you might want to consider some other sessions, such as the 4 o'clock tomorrow, how to roll out Salesforce Lightning, as we did, and sort of what are the lessons that we learned. That may be beneficial. So we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question, please do come up to the mic. That would be best because I can't hear as well. So if you can come up to the mic or talk to me afterwards, that would work too. So thank you all for your time. Go ahead.
Hi. The trailhead is very good. The Lightning consultation conversion is very good. This was very good.
Thank you.
I do have one question about, I know you said it's coming in the future, but the list view JavaScript buttons, we have a few that just do simple DML kind of stuff. Is there a current replacement? Like, can we just make a Visualforce page button or something and have the controller do simple actions or something like that?
Yep, that is the interim solution, is to use Visualforce actions. And they do work in Lightning M and Classic as well. So
what is the best way to do that? Because I was thinking maybe we could just pop a modal and have the Visualforce page visually just be a simple spinner, and then everything is happening in the background, and then.
Yep, that's the best way to do it. One of the things that, again, safe harbor, I'm looking at in the future is ability to control the form factor of actions once they're invoked, right? Right now, there's always a dialogue. Wouldn't it be great to run an action where it's sort of running without a UI or in the background or headlessly? So that would solve that problem. We don't have that yet, so that answer, that solution you're proposing is the best answer. But I do get requests for headless actions and ability to say, hey, why doesn't my action come up in the doc composer? Why is it always full screen? Or, why, so I get stuff around that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some issues with Lightning components. So we have pre-built controls like Lightning select, Lightning text area. Quite a few of them, the focus method doesn't work. So is there any, in near term, you guys will have fixes for that, or there is not even a workaround right now?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% familiar with Lightning components. Sorry, the components that you spoke about. We have another PM that does that. So either you can just send me an email and I'll get you in touch with our PM, or if you post on the Lightning Now community, that would be a best way to get answer for that. Sorry, I don't have more information on that one.
Hey, so
Hey.
One of the things that we use a lot of our URL hacks for is to pre-populate a record and navigate a user over to it. So
Yeah.
the challenge, and I've done the trailhead, and like the first guy said, this stuff's really great, and the Lightning component stuff is really helpful. But I still haven't found a way to land a user on a record page without saving the record in the database yet, because you can do some of the quick actions to like save the record, but I may want to push them through the page layout of that page and have some like read-only fields or page validation and stuff that I don't want to have to build the entire page layout on the quick action. So is there a way to push a user, kind of the way that a URL hack does, to the actual edit page, like the edit screen for whatever I'm trying to pre-populate, and not have it save into the database? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't think there's a way right now.
Because that's the most
Yeah.
painful piece
Yeah.
that I haven't been able to figure out yet. So.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way right now. I'll have to think about that one a little bit.
Okay.
Are you able to jump on the Lightning Now group and engage me
Yeah,
there?
I can submit it on there for
Yeah,
sure.
because I think that's going to require partnership between me and one of the other PMs to give
Okay.
you sort of a roadmap around that. But that's an interesting use case.
Yeah.
We don't have that yet. But again,
Cool.
engage with me on Lightning Now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, we are facing few challenges using action or detail page button. So the first challenge we're facing is if, for example, they have lookup relationship between parent and children, and then we're trying to create an action button on the parents to create the children records, and then even we create action put into the layouts cannot see that button. So we search on the limitation there, complain about the you have to use master detail, or if you have parent children both have master detail relationship to another objects, you cannot see the action button even though you change your layouts. There are a few other limitations as well. So we hit the door on those limitations. That's first thing we're facing. I'm not sure whether there's a workaround on this or not.
That one I'm not familiar with. I'm not sure of the answer to that one. So what I can do is I can look that up for you if I can get your contact information. I have another PM that I'll have to engage to get that answered.
Okay. The second question we have a lot of action or detail button called virtual first page.
Sorry, repeat that again?
We have an action or detail button to call virtual first page.
Okay.
Well, because we're using Lightning, we want to have a pop-up like a Lightning component default action button. But because we call virtual first page, what we're going to have a complete whole another page is look a little weird and not consistent with the default.
So that's what I was answering about. One of the first questions we got is customers request the ability to set the form factor of the action once it's invoked. So that is on the roadmap. So there is no workaround for that right now. So unfortunately, you just you're left with what we give you. But it is important on the roadmap to have fixed.
Okay, thank
So,
you. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Hi. So in one of the use cases we have is we have the view of an object overridden with a Visualforce page,
Yeah.
which is part of a managed package. And then on top of that, we have our own custom functionalities using buttons and redirecting user to a Visualforce page. So the issue we are facing right now is that if we try to capture the base URL, it gets the namespace of that managed package. So we don't want that for our own custom Visualforce page. So how do we do that? Because right now we are using JavaScript to build our own URL and then redirect.
Yeah, I mean, in that situation, the reason that's happening is because the Visualforce page set in the package is being given precedence, because that's sort of what we believe is the truth, right? There's no workaround for that. I mean, there's no way to remove that. That's the way the framework works, because it's being defined in the package. I mean, yeah, I think the best answer is to sort of look at the URL and parse it out yourself. It's not a request we get very often, I'll tell you that, though.
Yeah.
So you do have a workaround for the time being, right?
So we are using the JavaScript to do that.
Do we have time, or are we okay? Yeah, I think we're out of time. Yeah. So let me grab the questions outside of the room. Let me do that.